Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's program, 12 Easy Herbs for Your Garden or Patio. My name is Krista. I'll be your librarian host tonight from the Poughkeepsie Public Library District, and please join me in welcoming Chris Ferrero, Master Gardener at Cornell Cooperative Extension. We're giving our talk tonight. So a couple of quick housekeeping things before we get started. First, you are muted during tonight's presentation. No mics and cameras on, please. If you do have any questions or comments you'd like to make, please utilize the chat box below, and we'll try to get those questions answered as soon as possible. Tonight's program is also being recorded. So if you missed something, there is a chance for you to rewatch it in a couple of days. So be on the lookout for that email from me when I have that video ready to go, along with some extra handouts that Chris would like you to check out. You also should have gotten an email from me within the last week or so with 2 other handouts. So if you didn't get that, please reach out to me directly and I can make sure you get that. If you signed up after 6, I may have missed you. So just reach out either in the chat or through email, and I'll make sure you get those handouts as well. That's pretty much it from all that I have. But if you do enjoy tonight's program, please check out the library website, POKLIB.org. You can go to our calendar page and see all the other events we have going on this spring and early summer, both in person and virtual. All right, so I think that's all I've got to say. So I'm going to pass it along to Chris, and please enjoy, everybody. See you at the end.
Thank you, Krista. You are so good. Krista has gotten very good at scheduling gardening talks with Cornell Cooperative Extension's Master Gardener Speakers Bureau, which I represent, and I do. Actually, I'm the most frequent speaker in the Bureau. I have actually 18 talks that I have developed over 10 years as a Master Gardener, and Krista has scheduled many and will schedule a few more. I have a new one coming up. I think Krista is interested in scheduling at the maybe in the August timeframe, August, September, called Overwintering, because we've already done putting your garden to bed in the fall, which was last fall. I did that for Poughkeepsie, and a lot of other libraries and garden clubs, to the point where people have said, what else do you have that you can do in the fall? Because gardening has become a year-round subject. We love gardening. And now that we've been at home with COVID, quarantining and being safe at home, we've rediscovered our home landscapes. And you are not the only one who's having trouble. If you find a plant at a greenhouse or a nursery or a garden center, and you're looking at it and you're saying, oh, I'll think about it, and you walk away, don't walk away, because it may not be there tomorrow. That's how hard it is for the retail trade to keep up with demand right now. Demand is huge in the gardening industry. And thus I did 34 Zoom presentations last year. A couple for Poughkeepsie Library District. I love being with you folks. There are many of you tonight, and Krista is a great partner. She is going to be watching the chat room there, and if you've got questions that Krista knows enough to interrupt me, and with questions that might be specific to a particular, like tonight, a particular herb, and don't let me go much further past the herb, Krista. If somebody's got a question, please interrupt me. So this is actually going to be a full hour, because I've added to this talk. It's one of my oldest talks, and I just keep adding to it, and so it's pretty much a full hour. I hope you can stay with me. The handouts you've got are a plant list. I always have plant lists for my talks. I find that people like to take notes on the plant list. It makes it easier for you to make notes of things that you want to try. And also a flyer that I had a lot of fun putting together on how to use your herbs. But I also have, that Krista's going to email afterwards, a couple of recipes I'm going to refer to when we're going through the talk. So I hope you all know about Cornell Cooperative Extension. The Master Gardener Program is Cornell Cooperative's outreach to home gardeners. And our effort is to share with you best practices for home gardening and for your relationship to the environment. An ecological approach to home gardening is what we represent. And there are lots of ways to do that. In fact, we have coming up, not this weekend, but next weekend, our plant sale, which is going to be in person again on the front lawn, and it's huge. hundreds of perennials, hundreds of annuals, herbs, and some woodies too. There's a Ask the Master Gardener booth. There are gardening books, gently used gardening books that we all contribute, because we go through a lot of books and we have to make room. So we have a sale there. And so check out Krista, if you could put it in the chat box. It's ccedutchess.org/gardening. That's how to reach the Master Gardener program. And Joyce Tomaselli, our fearless leader, who is not here tonight, it's her birthday week. She's usually with me as helping as a hostess, as a co-host. And she also answers questions on the hotline as well, and the information on all of that, including how to sign up for Dutchess Dirt, our Master Gardener newsletter, is on ccedutchess.org/gardening. So let's start tonight with our 12 easy herbs. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. So these are the 12 easy herbs I started with. There's going to be a story behind that. But let's start by talking about, there we go. The uses that I'm going to discuss tonight when we're talking about all of these herbs. The first use is, of course, culinary. If you're a cook, you love fresh herbs. The second use is ornamental. They're beautiful. There are many of these herbs are just beautiful, no matter where you put them in your home landscape. Number 3 is aromatic. Let's not discount the fact that even brushing your hands across a lot of these plants is a stress relieving experience. And number 4 is medicinal. And I have to tell you, as a Cornell speaker, that I cannot deal with a medicinal function of many of these herbs. It's just not something that we do. And but I want to acknowledge that many people use them for that purpose. So where do we plant herbs? They can be happy in lots of different places in your home landscape. You can make the traditional English knot garden. This is something that we'd all love to have room to do. Very few of us have the room to do this. But you know what? A lot of these herbs are most at home in a rock garden, a Mediterranean style rock garden. If you've got an area in your yard to do that, they would be very happy. But really, one of the ways that they're most useful is in what is now called a kitchen garden, as it was in past days. A kitchen garden is merely something with proximity to your back door, to your kitchen door, where you can go out, where you can look out your kitchen window and see ornamental plants combined with herbs and vegetables, perhaps, but they're accessible to your kitchen, and that's why they're called a kitchen garden. You can look out and they're beautiful, and you can step outside to where, if there's even something on the stove and you don't want to leave the stove for long, they should be right there. In fact, we want to talk about how useful they can be in your vegetable garden, with the vegetables that you harvest regularly, because sometimes we forget to harvest herbs. Herbs need to be harvested just like vegetables need to be harvested. You can put them right in among your perennial borders. If you've got space in your foundation plantings or in your perennial beds, they're perfectly happy there, and they can be beautiful there too. Along paths, like I say, you brush your hands over these herbs as you're coming in your entry path from the mailbox. That's a great way to keep in touch with your herbs. And finally, they're sometimes most useful in containers because you can move them around, your deck to patio, sun to shade, near to your faucet, which you sometimes don't think about until you have to water them. And that makes them very convenient because you want them close by. The more convenient to your kitchen, the better. You can even harvest them if you don't have a recipe in mind, just to put them into fresh bouquets because they're pretty. But really, putting in the extra time that you see here, or even the little viola flowers and chive flowers, they make a beautiful little bouquet. But putting them into water on your counter means that you're going to think about using them tomorrow night and the next night. And they're just very handy and happy there, by the way. We'll talk about how to save them at the end. So what do they need in your garden? What do they need to grow best? They need, almost all of them need a lot of sun. And I'm sorry to say that because many of us have yards that have a high canopy of trees, and maybe those trees weren't there when you moved in. I moved into Hopewell Junction in the mid-90s, and it was a new development off of the Taconic Parkway. And they put a septic system in the backyard, and I said, oh my gosh, I got sun. And I planted all these sun-loving plants, and within 10 years, all of a sudden I had a canopy overarching that backyard, and I hadn't realized it had happened. It comes on you slowly. All of a sudden you don't have full sun, you have half sun, or you have what we call filtered shade. Some herbs can be perfectly happy in half shade, some will not. I will go down all these herbs one by one, and we'll talk about what they like best. But sometimes it's a matter of degree. You want the most sun for the best taste and or fragrance, but if you don't have that, you'll settle for 80% of the taste, won't you? You could. I will. I do. It's very rare that I have full sun. And I have, by the way, I've moved from the Hudson Valley 4 years ago. My husband and I retired, and we moved up to Stockbridge, Massachusetts, near where I grew up. And we're perfectly happy up here in a yard that has a lot of full sun space. And so I have some herbs that I never was able to grow before. Also, loose, well-drained garden soil or potting soil. This means that most of the herbs that we're going to talk about will not do well. And there's some exceptions. Parsley, for example, will, if you've got a place like last summer was so rainy, if you've got a place that collects puddles and you've got literally standing water, let's say most standing water situations drain in 24 hours. Parsley is perfectly happy in that kind of situation. But our Mediterranean plants that really want to be in Greece or Italy, those plants are not happy sitting in water. So clay soil that retains water is not the best choice for most herbs. Most herbs, particularly the Mediterranean ones, and we're going to talk about them again individually, want something that's a little sandier or more gravelly. You can plant them with a little bit of gravel, and that will help the drainage. We'll talk more about what to do. But most of these plants, whether they're Mediterranean or not, most herbs should not need fertilizer. And in fact, we suggest not using fertilizer, because if you use fertilizer and you're increasing the growth rate of your plant, sometimes the essential oils, the concentration of essential oils in the leaves of fresh herbs can be dissipated by that quick growth. So don't think of fertilizing a great deal. Basil might be the exception. Basil is like, if you plant your basil near tomatoes, it's really happy. And you know, tomatoes are very, very hungry for fertilizer. So basil won't suffer from that. But the others, you might notice less flavor. But certainly the care of herbs demands snipping and harvesting. That is something that you need to do. So plant them someplace where you're going to see them and visit them often, not once a week or once every 2 weeks. Okay, so how do you select herbs to grow? I want to propose that number one, of course, is culinary value. We're mostly thinking of herbs as helping us cook in a fresher and more flavorful way. And in fact, a single plant of each of these herbs might be enough for culinary value. But I want to suggest tonight, in the way that I selected my 12 herbs, was to balance the culinary value with ornamental interest. If you're going to use space, and if you don't have a lot of space, I think the plants that you choose should serve more than one purpose. They can't just be there to be in service to your kitchen, unless maybe it's basil. And I have a couple other examples. But why not use herbs that have wonderful ornamental value as well. I mean, we've got gray-green leaves with texture. We've got purple stems, dark purple foliage in some cases, stunning flowers if you want to let them go to flower. So I consider the whole value. And in fact, here we have the purple, one of my favorite basils. You know, you can use Genovese, which is the one on top, and that's the one that a lot of people use because if you're growing basil in quantity, Genovese is great for pesto. Then again, if what you want is to chop up some basil to sprinkle over your caprese salad, why not use purple basil? I love purple opal basil, purple ruffles basil. They can be plugged into your ornamental annual containers on your pots on your deck, and the contrast is wonderful with white and yellow petunias. Having a purple opal basil right in the pot with those it's a wonderful ornamental tool. And then you can take some leaves and use them. They are just as flavorful as Genovese. Well, there's some difference, but really, that balance is meaningful to me. And on the right, you see, you know what that bouquet is on the right? It's just I put into a drinking glass. I harvested, this was in 2020. It was in mid-November. And I knew we were going to have more freezing days. This was after several days of freezing temperatures. I said, oh, I'm going to harvest, do the last harvest. And I don't know what I'm going to use them for, but I'm going to put them in a glass on my counter. And there you see my rosemary, my sage, and I have some winter savory. I think there's some thyme in there. And, you know, I just said, yeah. And I ended up using it to stuff a chicken. So we'll talk a little bit about that. That's on my handout, a beer can chicken. Just grab a handful of that stuff and stick it into the cavity. Oh my God, with a couple lemons and some garlic. Oh, that's all you need to do. So ornamental interest is more than a bonus. I think it should be a requirement of a lot of your herbs. We've got lavender and chives, the beautiful purple flowering. We've got a variegated golden sage. I mean, why just use regular sage? Although regular sage is a noble plant, but the purple sage on the right, I love that. And the variegated golden sage, that the purple sage is in the back and on the right, and the variegated golden sage is actually an annual. It doesn't come back. In fact, mostly the purple sage doesn't either. But even as annuals, they serve beautifully for the whole season, ornamentally and culinary. And there's some flowering thyme in front, so you can see the contrast of the purple. There's even some parsley in the back. It's all beautiful. And then winter savory, we're going to talk. So you didn't see that on the list, did you? Well, I'm going to tell you why I added it. It's beautiful. And oh, this is, you know, this is about as raggedy as an old sage plant. That's my common sage plant. It's a 20-year-old plant, but when I took this picture a few years ago, it's now been replaced. I finally replaced it. It was an old plant that I never cut back because I didn't know you're supposed to, you know, 30 years ago. So I replaced it about 10 years ago. But in this picture, it was 20 years old and looking, but look at it with the geraniums and with the mums. I mean, this is in the fall, so you know that it's had a long hot year already. But look at the gray-green foliage, what it does to make the colors pop. It's still a beautiful plant. Okay, so here's the list divided by the types of herbs. Most of them are perennials that I'm going to present tonight, even rosemary and lavender, which, well, rosemary you would definitely call a tender perennial. In your zone, rosemary cannot be left outside unless you have a little microclimate that is a half zone warmer than the rest of your yard, is the way I would put it. I did have a situation like that in Hopewell Junction where a rosemary plant lasted 2 or 3 years. But for the most part, it either has to be brought in for the winter or you have to replace it the next year. The biennial, you know, this is interesting. Parsley is a biennial. I used to wonder why I had to replace a parsley plant I thought it was a perennial, and yet I had to replace it every 2 years. I couldn't figure that out until I did this presentation. I found out that parsley was a biennial. Biennials are in the second year, they grow in order to produce seed so the mama can say goodbye and leave the seed for you. Well, wherever I planted them, the seed never grew. And so Mama said goodbye in the second season, and next year I'd say, where's my parsley? I gotta buy a new one. Well, it's worth it. Parsley is biennial. It will last you 2 years, hopefully, and serve you well. And then we have the annuals, basil, cilantro, and dill, which we say you can grow from seed, actually. So let's talk about these one by one. Oh, but wait a minute. Cilantro and dill, if you know anything about these, you know they are not attractive plants. By nature, they're not, especially dill can be really raggedy and unkempt. It doesn't serve ornamental purposes. It just doesn't. So I was going to replace these at some point. And then I said, no, people love these too much. The response I got from people has been high interest. Either you love cilantro or you don't, or you hate it. But the people who love cilantro are big fans, and it serves many different kinds of cooking. So cilantro stayed in, and dill stayed in for similar reasons. So I said, oh, I have to keep them, but oh, I really want to replace them, but I'm not going to replace them. I'm going to keep them. So I'm going to add 2 more ornamentally satisfying herbs. And now I've got 14 herbs, thus the full hour. So we're going to talk about lemon verbena and winter savory, which are latecomers to this presentation. Winter savory is a reliable perennial. Lemon verbena is like rosemary, a tender perennial. It doesn't come back from me. I don't think it will for you, but it's worth getting every year. That's my point. So we're going to start with parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. I don't know how many people here are old enough to appreciate why I started with parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, but I'm not going to sing it. So parsley is the biennial I was telling you about. It's not, oh, in every case, by the way, when I'm going through these herbs, I'm going to tell you how to start. Some of these you can start from seed. Some of them you really just want to buy a 4-inch pot. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a transplant. I'm talking about buying a 4-inch pot from your local nursery or greenhouse or garden center. And I'm going to actually show a picture of how to, oh, you know what? Excuse me. Let me go back here. No. I'm missing a slide. I'm so sorry. The way that you take them out of the 4-inch pot, I had a picture actually of taking them out, loosening the roots, and planting them in a loose soil that you have loosened up with your trowel or with a garden fork. And to loosen up the roots gives it a good head start. So that's the picture that I'm missing. I apologize. This parsley is an example of one it's just not worth trying to grow from seed. You can even buy them in not, sometimes they're available in packs, and that means either a 4-pack of little 1.5-inch squares or 2-inch squares, or a 6-pack. Most nurseries have gone to 4 packs because they now charge the same price for a 4-pack that we used to pay for a 6-pack. But sometimes that is, in the case of parsley, and I'm going to tell you why in a second, it's if you can find a pack, they are easily transplanted, and you do not need a 4-inch pot, which might be $4.50 or $5 instead of a pack for $3.99. Okay, a pack of 4, and they grow fast. So that's why I would suggest a pack if you can get one. This is one of the herbs that does not need full sun. It in fact prefers cool temperatures. So if you've gotten a place that it gets hot afternoon sun in the summer, it may kind of stall it in midsummer because it really likes cool nights, particularly, and some shade. It will grow quite well, in fact, in high filtered shade or morning sun. It's not a Mediterranean herb. It needs a rich, fertile soil that retains moisture. So what you want to do if you've got clay or you've got sand is to amend your soil with, it's very easy. If you compost at home, you can use your home compost from kitchen scraps, etc., or chopped leaves, or you can buy compost from a bag of compost from the garden center and use that. It's a good amendment to a soil that's a little too sandy, because sandy soil won't retain the fertility that something like parsley needs, or the moisture, because it just drains out too fast. Or with clay, there isn't enough room for roots to make their way through the compacted clay. So it would prefer clay probably, but it really is a good idea to amend soil with compost for something like this, for parsley, as opposed to the Mediterranean plants that we'll get to that like sand and poor soil. So parsley is what we call a cut and come again plant. That means that the more you harvest it, the more it grows. So it loves it when you harvest it. The best way to harvest parsley, because the new growth comes up in the middle, is to harvest the older stems on the outside of the plant. You can harvest one stem, you can harvest half the plant, and it will still come up from the middle with new growth. And harvesting it actually inspires the growth. So keep doing that. And you can cut the stems at ground level. Otherwise you get these little stubs, and you want to use, even the stems are delicious, as you know about parsley. And please, I implore you, do not use part of your spice drawer or cabinet. Do not use that precious space in your spice cabinet for a jar of dried parsley. You might as well buy dried cardboard. I will tell you that when you first open the jar, you might actually smell something that resembles parsley, but within days, you might as well have cardboard. It's not worth it. Don't buy dried, and don't try to dry it. Even frozen, it will lose its flavor quickly. So just keep parsley. You can start early in the spring. It doesn't mind cool temperatures. I planted my parsley last week, and it will go past a couple of hard freezes. Actually, it's very sturdy, so it has a nice long season. Use it while you got it, and put your extra stems in water, and in November you'll still have some. So by the way, this is an important butterfly plant, and so I say make sure you plant two. You want to leave some for the caterpillars, because you know what? This caterpillar right here, it's not just a handsome caterpillar. This is a 2-inch parsley worm. It can be horrifying if you are afraid of bugs. But if you think about this parsley worm as the larva for the black swallowtail butterfly, maybe it will inspire you to plant some for the caterpillars. So the most popular varieties are the curly leaf or the Italian flat leaf. And I always favored the Italian flat leaf because I thought, as a serious cook, and you get this really nice big kind of little sub-shrub of and it's a stronger flavor. I always thought that was. Well, last year by mistake, I bought 2 parsleys, and one of them by mistake was a curly leaf. And I went, oh, I thought of curly leaf as just being garnish, Oh no, it was quite good. And in fact, in chopped form, it's got a different texture. So I now plan to buy one of each every year. So see, everybody keeps learning. This is a process of discovery. Gardening is a process of discovery. I don't care how long you garden. There is no point of expert. We're all just learning. Okay, parsley. Sage is next, and Salvia officinalis is one of many sage. All of the ornamental sages, from your perennial sage caradonna, perennial sage, to your Russian sage, Perovskia, they're all members of the sage family. And by the way, this is one family from the officinalis, the culinary herb, all the way to all those ornamentals. None of these are of interest to deer. And I can tell you, I'm the person who gives the talk called Deer Defense, Outwitting the Wiliest of Wildlife, using Cornell research. And we do not use the word deer resistant, because there are very few plants that deer will not try. And yet in the herb families themselves, and sage in particular, as well as the onions like chives and allium and garlic, you will never have deer bother them. These are pretty secure from deer browsing, with a couple of exceptions. One of them is parsley. Deer will nibble on your parsley, but when you're talking about a gray-green pebbly herb like this, they won't touch it. And in fact, if you plant it near your daylilies, this is what happened to me. Sage on one side, chives on the other side of my daylilies. That patch of daylilies, I never had to spray. That's not Cornell research, that's Chris research, sorry. But I'm just saying. So sage is best grown from transplants, but you know what? Later in the season, just make sure if you're going to take a stem cutting, you can even root it in water and start a new plant that you can take in for the winter. But do not, but a stem cutting will not be successful if, you know, sage can get quite woody, meaning woody stems. It's the floppy green stem, the flexible green stem that will work as a stem cutting, not the bottom portion of the stem that gets quite woody. A woody portion will not propagate. So yeah, you can propagate your own sage for the winter if you want, but start with a 4-inch pot. It's a perennial, it's well worth it. It's best in sun and well-drained soil. This is the Mediterranean plant. This is a good example. Mediterranean plants like well-drained soil, pebbly, sandy, rocky even. And don't keep watering it. Don't fertilize it. Don't put compost in that soil. It doesn't want it. And in fact, many people kill Mediterranean plants. Kill them with kindness, as what I say. You can kill them with kindness. They want to be in Greece. If you can imagine a hilly, rocky hillside in Greece, that's what you want for ideal conditions. Replicate in your yard. It doesn't have to be that. Of course, it can be in your perennial border, but just make sure that in that perennial border, are you really supplemental watering, using supplemental watering for your perennial borders? If you're a perennial gardener, you should be expecting from your perennials that they should be able to make do with some mulch and no supplemental watering. In my world, in my perennial gardening world, if a perennial says, oh, I need some water, unless it's a really bad drought, I say, hey, if you want water, you're out of here. I'm going to get something that doesn't need water. So I can talk tough. It's hard to pull a plant. Harder to pull a plant if you're a gardener, I know, but really, you can put them among your perennials, mulch the perennials, don't mulch your sage or your rosemary, and they'll be perfectly happy. Sages will thrive in those conditions, and they can get really big, like 2 to 3 feet high. What I learned was you want to be able to cut them back in spring, but don't do it until, don't cut them back in the fall, by the way. Mediterranean plants need some protection from our winters, and that protection is the protection that you give them is leaving the top growth on, so the crown isn't exposed to our below zero ground freezes without snow cover, which is the worst thing for perennial crown and shrub crowns. But if you've got a structure on there that actually has some old growth from last year, it protects it. So in the spring, like right now, last week I saw my first, it's called breaking wood. It's the first blush of new growth on the stems. And I said, okay, now I can cut them back to 2 inches. I leave some stems that weren't overly woody, but especially the old woody stems, cut them back and let new growth have room, have light and air to grow. The flowers, by the way, of sage are beautiful, but if you let them flower, and you can, understand that it will drain the energy from the plant, and the foliage does suffer. It'll lose essential oil, it will lose flavor, it'll lose substance kind of. But once the flowering is over, if you want to let one of your sage plants flower, they're beautiful. Cut them back to maybe 6 inches and let them come back, and they will revive, because a sage is a very sturdy plant. But typically you want to keep harvesting so that it doesn't flower. The most popular variety is common sage, is officinalis. It's long gray green pebbly leaves. You know what they look like. I love purple sage because the variegation in the leaf. They're not as hardy. and they have a little bit more delicate flavor, but they serve both purposes, ornamental and culinary. Golden sage, Icterina is the one that's often available. Is a variegated one, and there are lots of variegated sages, including the tricolor sage. These are not hardy, but are they beautiful in your pots on your deck along with your annuals? I love, and among your perennials, they're beautiful, and they have some. The Icterina is actually good. It has some culinary value. The tricolor, not so flavorful. It's so beautiful, but it's not so flavorful. Okay, on to rosemary. So rosemary is, don't even try starting it from seed, too hard. And you want to get a good 4-inch pot, if not a 6-inch pot, because you want a good root mass for rosemary to really take off and give you we don't have that long a growing season. So see if you can get one going early. As soon as the danger frost is over, get it in the ground. It doesn't need really warm soil. But it shouldn't be exposed to frost. So later this month, May, well, what is it down there? I think it's May. Well, it's May 15th. Usually we use Mother's Day as a marker for when the last frost is prone to last frost. It likes a dry, sunny location because it's what? Mediterranean herb. It grows well and therefore in poor, well-drained soil, sandy even, gravelly even, yes. And as a result, it's good in containers too. And I like to grow them in containers because you can bring them in to try to overwinter them. It only works variably well. It depends. You have to try different windows. You have to water regularly. We'll talk more about how to overwinter these. Actually, I have turned to what's called the prostrate. You know, the upright is what you see there. That's traditional. What I show you in the lower right-hand corner is a prostrate rosemary. And there are different varieties of the prostrate rosemary. They're great as spillers, cascaders in your mixed pots, for example, ornamental pots. They're really pretty. I also find that they tend to overwinter better. They don't get as woody. It's really hard once an herb gets woody, the stem gets woody, to keep it going because it wants a certain kind of, as a mature plant, it wants a certain kind of climate and cultural condition, and it's hard to replicate that indoors. Whereas the prostrate ones tend to stay green and not get woody. And so they're easier to keep harvesting in the winter. And as long as you get good light, easier to keep going, I find. So harvesting rosemary, again, a discovery of mine after many years of losing rosemaries when and I realize now it's when I have let it go for 2 or 3 weeks without harvesting it. You go out and the tender tips, you know, the wood kind of comes up the stem and there are very little new tender tips left because the wood has crept up the stem and now it's a woody stem with just a little tiny bit of tender tip at the end. And so I go in and I do this, what I show you there with the pruners. I say, well, I'm going to really harvest the heck out of you then. Well, the problem with that is that doing less frequent harvesting in larger amounts is not as good for plant health. Specifically, I have discovered that the guideline is to think about pruning no more than, when I say the leafy growth, I mean those tender tips, young stems, the green part that's still bendy. Don't harvest more than 25% of the leafy growth, that new tender growth at one time, and don't prune more than 10% of the woody growth. If you cut far down into the wood, you better only do it to 1 or 2 of those sprigs of those stems, or the plant will suffer. And I have lost them before, and now I know why. So I wanted to share that with you. On to thyme, another Mediterranean plant, and very hard to start from seed. It's best as a transplant, meaning a 4-inch pot. But again, sometimes you can get packs, but they're more typically available in 4-inch pots. These are Mediterranean plants that love sun, and they actually like warm soil. Some people say, I have a lot of trouble keeping thyme going. And other people say, oh my God, it's all over the place. It's in my lawn, it's in my, and it has to do with the conditions that you're giving it. If you plant when the soil is warm, meaning 60 degrees, and by the way, it's worth it to buy Amazon carries them, a $5 soil thermometer. It looks just like a cooking thermometer, except it's got a nice little sheath that protects it for your garden bag. And using a soil thermometer is really good this time of the year, because what's more important than air temperature to a lot of these plants is soil temperature. And if you're talking about thyme, that's one where it wants to be planted in warm soil, meaning 60-degree soil. So even if the danger of frost is gone, you want to make sure the soil that you're not in a really shady place where the soil is still very cool. For example, or if it's been raining a lot and the soil is compacted and it's still holding cold, it's worse than just stalling the plant once you plant it. It's telling the plant you're not welcome, and the plant will, a thyme plant will have trouble establishing in anything but warm soil. But if you give it warm soil and give it the conditions of sandy and good drainage, the Mediterranean conditions, it will spread. It'll give you a nice mat. This is, by the way, why thyme around stepping stones is really great. First of all, as you brush across it when you're stepping down your path, you're releasing the fragrance from the thyme, and it's wonderful. If you can let it go to flower, some of it at least go to flower, you get the beauty around your path too. But you know what's interesting? When you set a path, whether it's concrete or bluestone or flagstones, you are starting with a sandy base. You know how the people who lay the paths work, they level it in sand. That sand is perfect for thyme. So around your walkway is a great place for something like thyme, which stays low growing. By the way, the flowering, I find that you can let thyme flower, let it go by, and you don't have to shear it back. It'll just keep growing, and the culinary value of the leaves does not really, I don't think, degrade after flowering. So I never worry about letting my thyme go to flower. I don't know how you would prevent it anyway. And it's beautiful, a great mat of purple. It lasts a couple of weeks and it's wonderful. By the way, there are lots of different kinds of thyme. I find that lemon thyme also has good flavor, but some of the other ones, the variegated ones that are pretty, are not as good and not as flavorful. And I always tell people, when you're in a greenhouse, when you're in a garden center, go ahead and sneak a couple leaves off that plant to taste them, to see what you think before you buy. I do the same thing for grapes in the supermarket. I have to confess, I need one grape before I will trust you, Mr. Produce Manager, with selling me a not sour green grape. So I suggest you do the same thing for just a leaf or two in an inconspicuous place. Should not hurt the plant. Try it. And by the way, it's very easy to use. Don't worry about you can use the stems, but the stems of thyme can get woody. Again, later in the season, this is a plant that you don't think about it because it's kind of a vining plant and it's low, but those stems can get quite woody. And so you don't really, the new green stems early in the season are fine chopped up, but the woody ones later in the season, just strip it with your fingernails. It works fine. And by the way, I like thyme because you hardly have to chop it. No use, no big work. Oh, now we get to, people ask me what's my favorite plant and different ones of my presentations. My favorite herb, hands down, is chives. The combination of utility, of culinary utility and ornamental value is superb. And this is such a reliable soldier in your garden, no matter where you use it. The only thing you have to prevent is too many babies, and I'll tell you about that in a second. So this is a plant that's not a Mediterranean plant. It will take full sun, it'll take part shade, it'll be happy in lots of different kinds of situations. It ideally would like compost amended soil. It doesn't really want to sit in a lot of water, but it likes moisture. It's pretty easy to get along with, actually. It comes up. This picture is of a couple of years ago. The snow had literally just This was March 23rd. The snow had just melted away from a late snow here in Stockbridge, and there were my chives coming up. Those are, I would say at this point, 3 inches tall. And I want to tell you, at this point, you can start harvesting. The flavor in those little 3-inch blades is so wonderful early in the spring. It's not early in the spring, late in the winter, you can start harvesting. So you can start cutting the blades, and I just pinch them off, but you can cut them too at ground level from outside the clump. Again, cut and come again, and you use the older. Oh, by the way, these are the leaves. These kind of round blades. You probably are surprised to hear me call them leaves, but it's helpful to consider that these are leaves versus the flowers and the flower stems. So these are the leaves, and you can start harvesting them from the get-go. I wouldn't take at this point at 3 inches, I wouldn't take more than, I'd say, a third of the plant, but it comes along so fast that you've got more in 2 days. In 3 days, you've got even more. So don't worry, you can start harvesting. And by the way, in November, you still got them. They are a long delivering plant. The flowers are also useful. They're beautiful in salads, and they turn a white vinegar purple, at least temporarily for gifting. But be aware that the flower stems are very hard to distinguish from the leaves. The flower stems are not useful in a culinary way because they are, if you go to eat them, they're more than chewy. They're literally inedible, and they don't have the same flavor. So you have to be careful when you're harvesting. Well, when do you harvest the flowers? And you know, you're harvesting the leaves until the first week of June in the Hudson Valley is typically when it comes into full flower. In the first week in June, all of a sudden you've got the most beautiful floral display of that lavender purple, and they're fluffy. The bees and pollinators love this plant. It's a joy for 2 to 3 weeks. It's a joy. However, then every one of those flowers has hundreds of seeds, which will seed themselves all over your garden. Is that a problem? Maybe not in your garden, but I will tell you, you can have too many chive plants, too many chive babies. They're not hard to pull up when they're babies, so you can pull them up and compost them. That's fine, but or give them away. But be aware that the best way to prevent this wild scattering of progeny is to, and also for the health of the plant, is after flowering, meaning that the purple starts to turn to gray. That's your sign that, okay, it's not so pretty anymore. Now it's time to harvest the entire plant. Do not go in and try to cut out each flower stem. It is too hard. And here's the process that is going to deliver utility to you forever. So the 3rd week in June or so, you're going to cut back the whole plant, and I mean to the ground, but have a newspaper spread out and waiting on your patio table. Take that armful of harvest flowers, flower stems, and leaves, and dump it or lay it on that opened up newspaper, and then spread them out. And that's how you're going to be able to see, take each flower and its stem out of there. Don't compost it because there are lots of seeds in there, and they will wreak havoc in your compost if you're going to use your compost in your garden. So you're going to actually put them in your kitchen trash. When you're done, you will have, therefore, a bunch of flowers and woody stems that you put in your trash. And the rest of those leaves, you have a whole lot of harvested leaves, right? And you say, well, how am I going to use those? Well, first, let's get back to the plant. This helps the plant when she regenerates a new, and I will tell you that you have harvested enough to last you another 2 weeks. Those harvested leaves will last you 2 weeks in the refrigerator. In the meantime, that plant will come up, and you will get, where's my cursor? You will get another one of these within a week. Within 2 weeks, you'll be able to harvest again. So and it will be a healthier plant. She'll be much happier, fresher leaves. If you don't do this, these leaves are exhausted from, the plant is exhausted from flowering, and the leaves will get no more nutrition, no more care from the mother, and those leaves will not be as useful anymore. And it'll look lousy. So you might as well cut it to the ground, get new fresh growth, and within a couple of weeks, you'll have a new harvestable plant. And yet you've got all these chives in your refrigerator for 2 weeks. How do you do those? What do you do with those? Oh, I've got a recipe for you, which Chris is going to email you afterwards. This is a lemon herb goat cheese ball from Cook's Country. This is a recipe that I love because you mix up, your goat cheese and cream cheese and garlic and lemon and herbs, a basil, and you form it into a ball with plastic wrap and put it in the refrigerator to solidify, and in a circle, in a globe, in a loaf kind of, and you take it out in a day. And that's when you roll it in all those chopped chives that you have plenty of now. You roll it in chopped chives, and it makes a great. And now we're talking what, second week in June? Picnic season. Oh, yeah. Okay, on to tarragon. I don't think you will find in a nursery anything but French tarragon, because that's the most saleable kind. But don't buy anything but French tarragon, because that's the one with the flavor. If it's a tarragon plant, otherwise, I don't know why they're selling it. It's not available in seed form, actually, in any place that you could find it. So do buy a 4-inch pot. This is a perennial that should come back year after year. It makes a kind of a pretty herbaceous shrub, is what it really looks like. But it's the flavor, unique anise-like flavor. You either love it or hate it. If you like licorice, you will probably like tarragon. It's great for chicken and fish. And again, it prefers full sun, but actually tarragon to take a little bit of shade. I used to plant it on the shadier part of my plot. It does like well-drained, even sandy soil. It's not a Mediterranean herb, and yet it doesn't like standing water. But it's not fussy about how it's cut. When you harvest it, you can harvest the tips at the top. You can shape it up, because it's not naturally a shapely shrub, but you can take tips here, take a whole stem that fell over and cut it to the ground, cut from the outside, cut from the inside. It doesn't matter. It doesn't care. It's flexible. It can be dry, can be frozen. Oh, if you want an interesting butter for to serve with crackers, soften up butter and chop up tarragon and put that in, or use white vinegar and brewed tarragon vinegar. Lots of ways to do that online. Tarragon vinegar is very tasty. Mint. So, I hope mint is one of the most aggressive plants you could ever plant in your home landscape. So don't. I pulled I kept thinking, oh, I've got it over in a place where I can control it over here by the play set out of my garden. So it's not going to be a problem. When I lived in Hopewell Junction, I will tell you that I planted mint and tore it out 2 years later, 3 times until I discovered the only way you will have a well-behaved mint is if you plant it in its own pot, and make sure it's like an 18-inch pot. Otherwise, you will have roots coming out and rooting in the soil and running out from underneath the pot. But why did I keep returning it to my landscape if it's such a garden thug? If it's so aggressive, why did I keep wanting it back? The answer is fruit salad. Now, a lot of people use it for tea also. And there are different kinds of mint. There's peppermint, there's spearmint. Again, taste a little leaf from someplace inconspicuous on the plant before you buy it. Chocolate mint may taste like chocolate to you, may not. But I tell you what, just plain peppermint or spearmint, I will tell you that on the years that I tore it out, by July, when I had bought a cantaloupe that tasted insipid, or I had strawberries that weren't very sweet, I said, oh my gosh, why don't I have my mint plant? That's why I miss my mint plant, because there is nothing like taking fruit that is subpar, chopped in a fruit salad that you're going to serve company, and then taking a splurt of honey and chopped mint and tossing it. And then people go, "Ooh, where'd you get this fruit salad?" And you say, "Adams." No, you don't lie. You don't lie. You're gardeners. You don't lie. But really, it will improve any fruit. And so I now don't do without mint. I have it in a pot always. It actually doesn't prefer full sun. It prefers partial shade. It prefers rich, moist soil. But again, it will do perfectly well in a pot. And it's so hardy that you can take that big pot and come fall, put it underneath your deck or in some protected part next to your foundation and let it go. And in the spring, you pull it out, you water it, um, you don't do, you water it and you put it back in a little bit of sun and it comes back. So you keep it in the pot. It is something that would actually fries a little bit in hot afternoon sun. So morning sun or a high filtered canopy of shade is nice. And spearmint, peppermint, chocolate mint, apple mint, pineapple mint. I will tell you that I fell for mojito mint until I brought it home and put it in a second pot and said, "Oh, my son's going to love this. He loves mojitos." And then put that pot next to my other pot and realized it was exactly the same mint as the spearmint that was several years old. So don't fall for just any name. And yet you might want to try that chocolate mint or the pineapple mint. Oregano is, by the way, in the mint family. This is why it is what I would call a garden thug. It is aggressive, just like mint is. And please don't let it invade your perennial garden. It may be a beautiful plant in year 1 and year 2. The flowers are beautiful, but it is not worth what it does to your garden. The underground runners are unbelievable. As a result, I don't use oregano anymore because it has it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful flowering plant that it has ornamental cousins that you will see in the perennial section. But it says oregano, but it is not vulgare. Usually it's a variety, it's a hybrid that's being used for ornamental purposes only. They are not culinary plants. It'll be in the herb department if it's a culinary oregano. But what I really use is a cousin called marjoram. Sweet marjoram is a little less hardy, but it is a better citizen in your garden, and it actually does quite well in containers, and so you can kind of protect it for over the winter. Marjoram is, and there's a variegated version, and it's tasty, and I use it instead of oregano, and I'm happy with it. So as a perennial gardener, I prefer it. But they both like a lot of sun. They benefit from being cut back before they bloom. Again, blooming robs the plant of a lot of energy. And in the case of oregano, that takes flavor away from what's left. But if you want one of them, just have one go to flower, that's the, let's see, I can't remember the name of this. It's a fritillary, I think, of this butterfly. It's a fritillary, but it's the fritillaries really prefer oregano type blooms, and so it might be worth it having them go to flower. This is one of my new ones, winter savory. One of the ones I added. Winter savory is a Mediterranean herb. It's a lot like thyme, actually in flavor even, but it's really sturdy. It's got more flavor than what's called summer savory, which is an annual, not a perennial. It's got really sturdy leaves, and it's actually easier to harvest than thyme is. You can grab a bunch, and this is what I use for inside a chicken. A beer can chicken is winter savory. You use it like thyme. You use it with beans, lighter meats, but you'd add it later in cooking because it's a little bit tender. Stuffings, I love to add it to breadcrumbs for fish dishes. It's got a very strong flavor like thyme, maybe even stronger. And it's also got a habit similar to thyme. It stands up nicely as a border ornamental, except it has white flowers rather than those pretty purple flowers. Lemon verbena is one of my new ones, and it is an extraordinary plant. This color you see in this photo is not made up. This is how chartreuse this plant is, and it looks great, therefore, with darker foliage plants, with dark purple flowers. It's a beautiful, beautiful plant. And cooking, baking, the recipe, the second recipe that I'm asking Krista to email out after the program is a recipe from one of my master gardener friends, lemon verbena. It's from her mother's garden. It's kind of an heirloom recipe for lemon verbena cookies. And it adds lemon zest. It cheats a little bit, but it's really fun to be able to say, I grew this lemon verbena in my garden and it flavors these cookies. It's really nice for teas too. And by the way, for fruit salad, yes, as a substitute for mint sometime. And also, yes, it gets huge. This can get to be 3 feet tall. Light, well-drained soil, full sun, needs full sun. But there's a lot to harvest, and you can harvest a lot of the plant at one time. So you know what I do? When zucchini is way too plentiful in my garden in late July and into August, all of a sudden I've got way too many zucchinis. Oh my God, they're coming on strong. What I do is chop up a lot of zucchini and harvest a lot of lemon verbena and saute it up with some onions, but otherwise it's the lemon verbena and the zucchini are really nice complementary flavors, and it's all from your garden, and it's all plentifully from your garden. But by the way, it's nice to have it on your walkway because and on your patio, because the fragrance, you brush your hand across it and the lemon oils stay on your skin. It's really nice. And they also retain their scent when they're dried. They're nice and potpourris. So try lemon verbena. It's one of my new favorites. I call it an annual, even though it's also listed as a tender perennial. I've never seen it come back. You'd have to have quite a little microclimate for it to survive again. But again, it gets so big. It's from a little 4-inch pot. Oh yeah, it's worth it. Oh, I've never had one flower, but they look like oregano. And so I would imagine the butterflies and bees love these too. Basil. So, if you want that big crop of basil for pesto, you can start basil from seed. I always buy my basil in packs. Whether it's purple or whatever kind of basil, they're usually available in packs, and that's, I think, the most cost efficient because they grow pretty fast. They're very delicate. Be very careful. They want warm soil, meaning 60-degree soil, just like tomatoes. They are planted with tomatoes. Would be very appropriate to plant them with tomatoes because they want the same kind of conditions: warm soil, lots of sun. So you can sow the seed directly into warm soil. If you have perfect conditions, you can grow them pretty fast, or you can use transplants from the packs. It does need full sun, rich, loose, well-drained soil, rich meaning amended with compost, and yes, sometimes fertilized too, like you do your tomatoes. At 6 inches, gird your loins, pinch them. 3 sets of leaves, pinch them. It's hard because at that point, the leaves are just starting to look really sweet. And it's really hard to say you're going to pinch them back. Oh no, it's just started. Gird your loins and do it, because this is how you get a branching stem with lots more to harvest. The only way you get branching is every 6 inches you pinch. Now, you don't have to throw away what you pinch. You use it, you harvest it, and that's how you harvest. Even if these Genovese, for example, will come in with flower buds, and at this stage that you're seeing in the lower right, that flower bud needs to be pinched off. Otherwise, that stem will go down. Basil will give all of its energy to that bloom. And in the case of Genovese, not Thai basil. Thai basil, I now use, by the way, Thai basil, because Thai basil keeps blooming and it doesn't affect the value of the leaves. And so you have both, and that's nice, although Thai basil is a little more bitter. But for Genovese, with those tender leaves, they will go down if you don't pinch the buds. But you know what? The buds are delicious too. Use the buds in salad. So favorite varieties: Genovese, that's what you're finding in the grocery store. It's the best for pesto by most people's standards. The purple basils, dark opal, purple ruffles, etc. I've talked to you about those. I favor these because they're so versatile for ornamental purposes, but also a good container plant is what we call spicy globe. Tiny leaves that don't even need to be chopped. And it mounds, and it's so pretty when it mounds in a container. And this is one that you probably can't keep up with the blooms at some point. The buds, it'll start budding and flowering, but the leaves don't seem to, you just grab, you could grab the lower left-hand corner, maybe an eighth of that plant, just grab it, pull it away, and clip it off at the ground, and it will fill in. Cut and come again. And then we have Pesto Perpetua, which is, I think, kind of a Thai basil actually, but it's a variegated, beautiful columnar, variegated. It makes a woody stem, but you just harvest the leaves, not the tips or the stems, and it keeps growing beautifully in a container. It grows up and never flowers. And it is ornamentally beautiful because it's variegated, and it tastes pretty good. At the end of the season, I harvest all of that plant, meaning I cut the stems down. I treat it like a stem of thyme by taking and stripping the stems off of, stripping the leaves down off the stem, and I make a pesto out of that at the end of the summer.
Hey, Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt. We had a question from Joanne asking why the basil you get in the grocery store, why they die so fast, if you know that.
Those are forced in greenhouse conditions. I dare anybody to replicate the greenhouse conditions that those plants have learned to love. Some of them are sturdier than others, but yes, if you've got I assume you're talking about the kind they sell in soil in a pot with a cellophane collar around it. Sometimes they work, sometimes they last a long time, but usually they are craving the conditions that they left back at the greenhouse in the, and that's very hard to replicate in your home. I will say that when we're talking later about how to save these, I've got a couple more to go here, and then we're going to talk about how to save them best. And basil does not want to be saved in the refrigerator for the same reason why it is the harbinger of the frost. Even before the first frost, the first cold night you get in September, and bang, the basil goes down. And all of a sudden you've got a black plant in the middle, a black slimy plant in the middle of all these other plants. I went, I don't know what her problem is. I'm fine. We didn't have frost last night, but that basil is so sensitive to cold that it doesn't keep well in the refrigerator. That's the other thing that you have to know. It keeps much better at home at room temp in a glass of water. Okay. So we'll get to that in a minute. Thank you for that question. That's a good question. So cilantro is something that, and dill, which comes next, just before we get to our last plant. Cilantro is best from seed. You go to the store and you see these plants like Joanne asked in the last, that last question. You see them in pots in the grocery store. You see them in pots in nurseries. And I'm telling you that it is not worth it. They are so easily grown from seed. They germinate really fast. And you can do what we call successive sowing, meaning that every 3 weeks or so, you plant a new row of them so that some are coming up and maturing and being harvested while the others are coming up and maturing. And you keep doing that until the hot weather hits, because they don't really like hot weather. You need to start sowing as soon as I would say in a couple weeks, as soon as the danger of frost is over, start sowing those seeds, and they'll germinate fast and they'll keep coming. But the thing that bothers me is that they're selling plants of an herb that is not a cut and come again herb. This is an herb that if you cut parts of it, the rest of it would just die and never put up a new stem. This is a plant that you harvest the whole plant at ground level, and hoping that the next row that you seeded will come in the next week. So you're harvesting the whole plant when it gets to be about 8 inches, 9 inches high, maybe. or whenever you need it, but you harvest the whole plant. So why are you spending $4.99 on a plant when you're going to harvest the whole thing in 2 weeks and then have none? So that's why we say grow from seed. And by the way, speaking of seed, the upper growth, if you let it go and you don't harvest it, you'll notice the upper growth starts to get ferny and frondy, and then flowers appear. That's because that frondy dill-like foliage precedes the flowering. The flowering is that plant, and again, it's ready. It has a very short life cycle. So it's going to say, oh, I need to produce progeny by seeding. And so those flowers are there because that plant wants to produce seed to make babies for the next generation. Now that seed, which you can try letting one go to seed and see what, just for your own experience, because the seed that's produced is coriander. Coriander seed, or ground coriander from seed, is from a mature cilantro plant. It's, in fact, that you'll notice the Latin name, coriandrum sativum. Coriandrum is a coriander plant. The young plant is cilantro. The foliage plant is cilantro. Once it goes to seed, the seed is called coriander. And coriander, in turn, is not just used in a lot of ethnic cuisines, but it's also used to produce some very nice vermouth and gin. Coriander has a whole different flavor than cilantro, right? Citrusy and sharp, nice. So dill, like cilantro, we recommend growing from seed. And these fronds are not just for garnish. It's a unique flavor, as you know, for herb butters. Oh yes, soften up some butter and chop up some dill and put it in there, and then smash it into a little dish. Oh yeah, people love it. Dips and sauces. So you can now, as soon as, in fact, it can take a couple frosts, so you can actually sow your dill now. Dill plants are fairly short-lived. Again, once the summer heat hits, it's much harder to keep it going, and it looks terrible in summer heat. So you want to snip it regularly, but also do successive seeding so that you've got fresh dill, and you can cut down the dill before it gets really awful looking. But it needs full sun, well-drained soil, but a steady water supply. And that's kind of the reason why it can be hard to grow in containers, like you see here on this deck, because it does provide well-drained soil, but it's very hard to keep a mature dill going for as much moisture as it needs. You'd end up watering it like at least once a day and probably twice a day in the middle of summer, or as the summer heat hits. So that's why you should pay attention to dill earlier in the season and try to keep it going with successive seeding, and start again in the fall, in the late August, get it going, germinating again. My final herb is lavender. Lavender, people have trouble growing, right? But it's prized for its scent. Its flowers are also used not just for scent, but and potpourris, but for desserts. The leaves, by the way, are what make the unique flavor in Julia Child's Herbe de Provence, classic French cooking. Herbe de Provence, I have it on my handout, is you can find many different recipes for it, for mixing the herbs for Herbe de Provence, but the ones that are really nice, in my mind, are the ones that rely on lavender as part of the mix, and as a result, that's nice for fish and chicken. Transplants, here's the secret. There are 2 secrets to growing lavender. Number 1, they're Mediterranean plants. And what have we learned about them? They need full sun. They need good drainage. Yes, they're great along a walkway path, both because you can brush your hand over as you're walking up, but because also that gives them the sandy kind of ground that they need for good, we call it sharp drainage. Particularly for the winter, they need sharp drainage. If you're trying to winter over a lavender plant that's marginal in our zones up here, you want number 1, sharp drainage, and number 2, some kind of protection. I don't mean you want to burlap them, but I do mean do not cut them back in the fall. If you cut them back in the fall, they will not come up again in the spring, unless you have a microclimate that is more like Delaware, because that's the last place I could cut back back when I lived in Delaware, I could cut back lavender and it would come back. Up here, it will not. You need the crown to be protected by the upper growth. Don't touch it in the fall. And I know it will capture leaves. It'll look messy. Be prepared for that. In the spring, by the way, again, you're waiting for it to break wood, meaning the blush of new growth has to appear on the stems before you cut it back. I'm waiting for my lavender still. It always gets me. It's mid-May before it's the last. Butterfly bushes and lavender are the last ones to break wood, and you go, finally, I can cut this monstrous looking thing back. But yeah, you have to be patient, and that's the secret of lavender. So saving them, yeah, most keep well in the fridge, crisper drawer, in a plastic bag with a damp paper towel like you see here. Very easy to do. Just throw a paper that you don't have to roll them. Just throw a damp paper towel into a plastic bag and put your herbs in there. But some will also do fine if you put that glass of snipped fronds into the refrigerator, right into the fridge. But if you're talking about basil, you're talking about wanting room temperature because it won't last long in the cold of your refrigerator. It doesn't want cold. And if you're storing in a glass of water, do change the water every few days because that's important to herbs. And finally, yeah, you can dry a lot of these herbs, but the delicate ones like basil, parsley, chives, cilantro, they lose flavor, as we talked about with parsley. And if you're cooking with the herbs you've dried, know that you only use about 1/3 of the herb in dried form as you did for fresh. And so just some fast notes about overwintering. I have to tell you, I am not successful overwintering herbs indoors. Part of it is that an annual herb is meant to, an annual means it lasts one season, meaning that at the end of the season, it doesn't want to produce for you anymore. It can't. It's used up its energy. Let it go. Buy a new one if you think you have the conditions indoors that will make it happy. But sometimes it takes a lot of experimenting to know which window, how close to the window, how much moisture, what kind of heat you have in your house and how humid your air is or not, etc., as to what will work for your herbs indoors. But do try buying new ones if you're talking about annuals. Try, and by the way, one of those supermarket ones might work better in your house than trying to grow it outdoors, because it's more like a greenhouse indoors, or you can make it more like a greenhouse. If you're talking about perennials and you really want to bring something in, it's going to need what they call an artificial winter. It has to go through a few freezes, and then you cut it back and pretend it's spring. Oh, when you bring it inside, no, it's spring. You can grow again. You can try it. It has never worked for me. They need sunny window or artificial light. Lighted shelves are a nice thing for herbs, and they need to be harvested, but not as vigorously. Their growth is much slower indoors and during winter, so you don't harvest as aggressively, but that you do need regular watering. And before you bring them out in the spring, here's my window box from years ago. That parsley in the corner there is coming back already, and so I brought my prostrate rosemary out to the window box and planted it again. It lasted for the winter. But I will say that if you're bringing them out in the spring, be careful, like you do any indoor plant bringing outside. Has to be what they call hardened off, which means the first day, exposure to sun, wind, particularly sun. The first day you only give it 10 minutes even. The second day, 20 minutes. The third day, 45 minutes, and the fourth or fifth day, you can finally bring it out. So it takes some work to harden off a plant that's used to indoor conditions and not to the UV and the wind conditions of outdoors. So with that, I will ask you to please enjoy as many of these herbs as you can fit into your gardens for their beauty, their flavor, and the fragrance value for your home landscape. Thank you for bearing with me. That was more than an hour, and I appreciate your time. Any other questions that we have here? Krista?
No, I don't think we have any more questions.
That's because I gave so many handouts. See, when I give a lot of handouts.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions though, last chance here before we say goodnight. Any questions, please put them in the chat. And you will be getting the recording of tonight's program along with the recipe handouts. And I can also throw in the other handouts too. So just give me a couple days to get the video ready to go, and then I'll send it along.
Oh, thanks so much, Krista, for hosting us again. I hope to see you soon.
Yes, hope to see you soon. Thanks everybody for coming out. Thanks again, Chris, and see you at another virtual program, hopefully.
Good
Good
luck,
night.
everybody.